Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our story. As the days passed, Mark began to settle into his new life with Eleanor. He moved into the grand mansion, a place so large it felt like a world of its own. The house had everything: expansive gardens, marble floors, and rooms filled with furniture more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. It was a far cry from his small, cluttered apartment, a life that now felt like a distant memory. Eleanor kept to herself mostly, but every evening they would share dinner, her silence filling the room as much as his own. There were no real conversations, just the soft clink of silverware and the steady rhythm of their lives. The arrangement was simple: she needed a husband for appearances, and he needed financial security. That was it. He never questioned it. Until one evening, when everything began to change. It was a chilly autumn night when Mark found himself sitting across from Eleanor at dinner, a glass of wine in his hand. The silence between them was thicker than usual, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Eleanor, who had been distant and cold since their marriage, was now gazing at him, her fingers delicately tapping on the edge of her wine glass. For the first time, he noticed a vulnerability in her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. "How are you settling in?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than usual. Mark glanced up, surprised by the question. He had gotten used to the formal, businesslike conversations they had. It's been a big change," he replied, not sure what to say. "I don't think I'll ever get used to the size of this place." He chuckled nervously. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I suppose it can be overwhelming." The words felt almost like a confession. Mark looked at her, trying to read her expression, but she was already looking away, her gaze drifting to the window, where the night sky was dotted with stars. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" Mark asked, confused. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She seemed lost in thought, her fingers twisting the stem of her glass. Finally, she looked back at him, meeting his eyes. "For using you like this. For dragging you into my world." Mark blinked, taken aback by her honesty. He had expected her to stay detached, to keep up the facade. But here she was, confessing something he hadn't even realized until now. They were both stuck in this arrangement, tied by a contract neither of them had truly agreed to with their hearts. I never thought of it that way," Mark said slowly. He had been so focused on his own situation that he hadn't stopped to think about how Eleanor must feel. "But I'm here now. And I'm going to make it work." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes were distant again. "I hope so." For the rest of the evening, the conversation lingered in the air between them. It was awkward and uncomfortable, but it was also the beginning of something more. Eleanor was still the cold, distant woman he had married, but now there was a crack in her armor, a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him as something more than just a solution to her problems. Mark didn't know where this would go. He didn't know if they would ever truly be happy together, but for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this marriage, this arrangement could turn into something real. Maybe he wasn't just here for the money and security after all. The next few days were filled with awkward silences and hesitant glances. It felt like they were both walking on eggshells, unsure of what to say or do. But one thing was clear: things were changing between them. Eleanor's guard was starting to slip, and Mark was beginning to see the cracks in her carefully constructed world. But it was still too soon to tell if this newfound vulnerability was something that would last or if it was just a fleeting moment in an otherwise cold relationship. As the days went by, Mark and Eleanor continued their lives in the mansion, yet the distance between them was slowly shrinking, piece by piece. They were both learning to navigate this strange, new reality they had created for themselves. Every evening, they shared dinner, though the conversations remained brief and formal. But there was a shift in the air now, something unspoken, lingering between them. One evening, as autumn's chill settled outside, Eleanor invited Mark to join her in the library, a place he had not yet ventured into. The room was grand, lined with shelves of old books and a massive fireplace crackling with warmth. She was sitting by the fire when he entered, her posture elegant but tired, as if the weight of something unsaid was bearing down on her. "I thought we could talk," she said, her voice softer than usual. Mark hesitated for a moment before nodding and sitting down across from her. "About what?" he asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor paused, staring into the fire for a moment before looking up at him. "About us," she said quietly. "I know this arrangement was never meant to be anything more than a contract. But I can't help feeling like we've both been lying to ourselves." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been trying to ignore the truth for so long, focusing only on the security this marriage brought him. But Eleanor's words hit him harder than he expected. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cautious. Eleanor shifted in her seat, her fingers gently tracing the armrest. I think we've both been pretending. I've been pretending that this is just about the business deal, and you've been pretending that you're okay with being part of it." Her voice faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "But I can't pretend anymore, Mark. I've spent so much of my life hiding behind this mask, behind this empire that I built. But I don't want to hide from you anymore." Mark stared at her, unsure of what to say. This was the first time she had admitted anything like this. For the first time, he saw the cracks in her perfect facade. The woman sitting in front of him wasn't the cold, calculated businesswoman he had married. She was someone vulnerable, someone who was just as lost as he was. "I didn't ask for this marriage," Eleanor continued, her voice low. "I didn't ask to be alone. But I couldn't find a way out, not with everything I've built. And now I'm trapped in this world that I don't even know how to navigate anymore." Mark felt his chest tighten. He had always seen Eleanor as the woman who had everything, someone who was untouchable, unreachable. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. She was just a person, trying to keep it all together in a world that demanded perfection. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to be here just for the money. I was struggling, but I'm not blind. I can see how hard this is for you." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "But that doesn't change the fact that we're still pretending," she said, almost to herself. The room fell silent as they both sat there, the weight of their words hanging between them. Mark thought about the life he had built for himself, the dreams he had given up on, the guilt that gnawed at him for not realizing sooner how lonely Eleanor had been all this time. He realized that their marriage had always been about more than just the contract. It was about two people trying to survive in their own ways, both trapped in different kinds of prisons. "I don't know where this is going," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try. I don't want to pretend anymore, Eleanor." She gave him a small, tentative smile. "I don't want to pretend either," she replied softly. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew more frequent, less formal, and more personal. They began to open up to each other, revealing pieces of their past that had been hidden behind their facades. Eleanor shared stories of her childhood, of how she had always been expected to be perfect, to live up to the high standards set for her by her family and the company she built. Mark, in turn, spoke about his struggles after his father's death, the weight of his responsibilities, and the pressure he had felt to take care of his family. It was during these quiet moments, in the midst of their growing bond, that they realized the contract was no longer the only thing holding them together. There was something more now, something real. But they were both still cautious, unsure of how far they could trust their feelings for one another. They were still bound by the contract, and though the walls between them were crumbling, it would take time for them to fully break free from the past. As time went on, Mark and Eleanor's relationship began to shift in ways neither of them had expected. What started as a contractual arrangement was slowly blossoming into something deeper. They spent more time together, talking long into the night, sharing parts of their lives that had been hidden behind walls for so long. Their interactions were no longer just about formalities or duty. There were moments of laughter, moments of silence that felt comfortable, and moments where they simply enjoyed each other's company without any pretensions. One evening, as they sat in the library, the fire crackling softly in the background, Mark looked at Eleanor with a question in his eyes. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be deep in thought, her gaze fixed on the flames as if they held the answers she needed. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I do," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if we're both just fooling ourselves. If we're really doing this, because we want to, or because we feel like we have no other choice." Mark nodded, understanding more than she knew. He had spent so much time focused on surviving, on keeping up appearances, that he hadn't stopped to consider what he really wanted. Now, with Eleanor, he was starting to realize that maybe he didn't just want security. Maybe, for the first time, he wanted something more. "I never thought I'd say this," Mark continued, his voice thick with emotion, "but I don't feel trapped anymore. I feel like I'm actually living, like I have a chance to be more than just someone who's trying to make ends meet." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. There was something in her gaze, something vulnerable that made his heart ache. "Mark," she said softly, "I didn't want any of this. I didn't want to end up here, with a stranger pretending to be my husband. But now, I don't know." Her voice faltered slightly, and for the first time, she looked truly unsure of herself. "I don't know if this is real, or if I'm just getting used to you." Mark's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he was frozen, unsure of how to respond. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit into someone else's expectations, trying to live up to what others wanted from him. But with Eleanor, he was learning to just be himself. "I think we're both figuring this out," he said softly. "But I want to be here, Eleanor. I don't want to just keep going through the motions." Eleanor's lips curled into a small, tentative smile. It was a smile that seemed to carry with it years of pain, years of pretending, but also the promise of something new. Something real. But even with their growing connection, there were still barriers between them. Eleanor had always lived in a world where control was everything, and Mark had always been afraid of losing what little he had. The fear of vulnerability was something they both struggled with, and it was something they would have to face together. It was a fear that, for the first time, didn't seem so insurmountable. The next few days were filled with small, but significant changes. Eleanor began to let her guard down more, allowing herself to be vulnerable in ways she never had before. She invited Mark into her world not just as a husband, but as a partner. She showed him parts of herself that had been buried beneath the layers of her carefully constructed image. She shared stories about her childhood, about the pressure to succeed, and about the loneliness that had come with her success. Mark, in turn, opened up more than he ever had. He talked about his past, his family, and the fear of failure that had haunted him for most of his life. Slowly but surely, they began to rebuild their relationship not on the foundation of a contract, but on something more solid. Trust. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Mark turned to Eleanor, a look of quiet determination on his face. "Eleanor, I think we need to stop pretending," he said softly. "This what we're doing, it's not a contract anymore. It's real. It's something we both need to give a chance." Eleanor looked at him, her expression softening. "I want to believe that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I do. But I'm scared." Mark reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "I know," he said. "But I think we can face it together." The night grew quiet as they sat there, the sound of crickets filling the air. For the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. They were two people, bound by a shared journey, starting to build something real, something that had the potential to become a true partnership. It was still uncertain, still fragile, but it was a start. And that was enough. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor's connection deepened in ways neither of them had expected. What started as a mere contract had transformed into something more meaningful, something real. They spent more time together, sharing stories and laughing in the quiet corners of their massive home. Yet, despite this growing bond, there were still moments of hesitation, moments when old fears and insecurities crept in. It was a beautiful spring evening when everything came to a head. Eleanor had invited Mark to accompany her to a gala, a large charity event that she had been planning for months. She was the guest of honor, and the night would be full of the city's elite, many of whom had no idea that her marriage to Mark was anything but a traditional one. As the evening unfolded, Mark couldn't help but feel out of place. Surrounded by well-dressed strangers, he stuck close to Eleanor, who seemed at ease in this glamorous world. She looked stunning, her silver hair styled to perfection, her gown shimmering in the soft lighting of the ballroom. She was everything he had imagined, a woman who knew how to navigate the world of high society with grace and authority. But as the night wore on, Mark realized that he was no longer just a stranger by her side. He was beginning to feel like he belonged here, with her, in this world. Eleanor caught his eye from across the room, offering him a small smile that warmed him from within. For the first time, he saw her not just as a business partner or a woman who had been forced into a contract, but as someone who was becoming a partner in life. They shared a quiet moment, standing by the balcony overlooking the city, away from the noise and the people. Eleanor turned to him, her expression softening. "You look out of place," she said with a smile. Mark laughed, shaking his head. "I feel out of place." "You're not," she said, her voice sincere. "You belong here, Mark. You belong with me." The words hit him harder than he expected, stirring something deep inside him. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit in, to survive, but now he was beginning to realize that belonging wasn't about fitting into a world, it was about finding the person who made everything feel right. And in that moment, standing by her side, Mark knew that he had found that person. The next few days were filled with moments that marked a new chapter in their relationship. They continued to talk more openly, sharing their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Eleanor began to open up about her fears, about the pressure she had felt to be perfect, and how much she had longed for someone to see her as more than just her wealth and status. Mark, too, began to share more about himself, his past, and the emotions he had buried for years. The more they spoke, the more they realized that their marriage, once a mere arrangement, was now something that could blossom into true love. Yet, even as they moved forward, there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. Eleanor had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, and Mark, though no longer afraid, was still unsure about how to navigate their growing feelings. That evening, as they sat together in the study, a silence stretched between them. Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of unspoken words. "Eleanor," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I want to believe that this what we have is real. But I still don't know if I'm ready to let go of the past." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes soft but searching. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice gentle. Mark took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been so afraid of losing everything, of losing myself, of losing you, of losing what we've built. But I'm starting to see that maybe it's not about holding on. Maybe it's about letting go." Eleanor reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're not alone in this, Mark. We're in this together, every step of the way." And for the first time, Mark believed her. He believed in them, in what they were building together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They still had a long way to get here, would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, but in that moment, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. It was a new beginning, and Mark wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, he felt like he had found a place where he truly belonged. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor's connection deepened in a way neither of them could have predicted. They were no longer just two people living in a contract, they were slowly becoming partners in every sense of the word. The more time they spent together, the more they learned about each other's vulnerabilities, their dreams, and their fears. They had begun to let go of the walls they had spent so long building. But despite the progress they had made, there were still moments of uncertainty. Eleanor, who had always been in control of her world, found herself unsure of how to fully embrace this new relationship. She had spent so many years living for others, building an empire, only to realize that what she really longed for was something much simpler, a connection with someone who saw her for who she truly was. And Mark, though he had come a long way since their first meeting, still had his own reservations. He had always feared rejection, had always kept his emotions buried deep inside, afraid that if he let anyone in, he might lose control. But with Eleanor, he began to realize that sometimes, letting go of control was the only way to truly live. One evening, as the two of them sat in the study, the quiet hum of the house surrounding them, Eleanor spoke up, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. "Mark, I need to ask you something," she said, her eyes looking away for a moment, as if trying to gather her thoughts. Mark looked at her, his heart already beating a little faster. "What is it?" he asked gently. Eleanor hesitated, then turned to him, her eyes meeting his. Do you think this can really work? I mean. Without the contract, without the promises we made in the beginning." Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was a question he had been asking himself as well. They had come so far, yet there was always that lingering doubt, that fear of what could go wrong. But as he looked at her, he saw the same vulnerability in her eyes that he had felt inside himself for so long. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers, and smiled. "I don't know what the future holds, Eleanor. But I do know this: I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop around them. The noise of the house, the city outside, everything faded away until it was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something new. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid that I've waited too long to let someone in. I don't know how to do this, how to let myself be vulnerable." Mark squeezed her hand, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. I'll be here, every step of the way. We don't need to have all the answers right now. We just need to take it one day at a time." Eleanor looked at him, her lips trembling with emotion, before she finally let herself smile. It was small, but it was real. And in that moment, Mark realized something: they didn't need to have everything figured out. They didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that they had each other. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful moments that solidified their bond. Eleanor invited Mark to accompany her to one of her charity events, a night dedicated to raising funds for a cause she had always been passionate about. Mark, who had never been part of that world, felt nervous and out of place. But when he saw Eleanor in her element, confidently speaking to the crowd, her eyes lighting up with purpose, he felt a sense of pride that he had never experienced before. It was then that he realized just how much he admired her strength, her resilience, and her ability to make a difference. After the event, they stood outside, the night air crisp and cool. Eleanor leaned against the railing, her gaze drifting out over the city. "Thank you for being there tonight," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Mark smiled, stepping closer to her. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." They stood in comfortable silence, the weight of the world momentarily lifted from their shoulders. Mark took a deep breath and turned to Eleanor, his heart full. "You know," he said softly, "I think I'm starting to fall for you." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and she looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, the world around them seemed to stand still. Then, with a small, tentative smile, she reached out and took his hand. "I think I'm starting to fall for you too," she whispered. And in that moment, both of them knew that this wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. It was something more. Something real. As the days went by, Mark and Eleanor's connection grew even deeper, but so did the challenges that came with their new dynamic. They were no longer simply two strangers living under the same roof. They had begun to feel like partners, even though the weight of their unconventional marriage still loomed over them. The more they opened up to each other, the more they realized the depth of their feelings, yet the fear of losing everything still lingered in the back of their minds. It was a beautiful Sunday morning when everything shifted. Eleanor had planned a quiet day for them, a rare moment away from the chaos of their separate lives. They were sitting in the garden, the sun casting a warm glow on the flowers and trees around them. The peaceful atmosphere seemed to soothe the tension that had been growing between them, but the underlying uncertainty was still there. Eleanor sat across from Mark, her fingers gently tapping against the table. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of longing and worry. "Mark, I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft. "We've come so far, and I'm starting to feel like maybe this could actually work. But I'm scared." Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with the same fear. He had been trying to suppress his own doubts, but hearing her voice them out loud made everything feel more real. "I'm scared too," he admitted, his voice low. "I'm scared that I'm not enough. That I'll mess this up somehow." Eleanor smiled softly, a sad but understanding smile. "I feel the same way. I've built my whole life around control, around making sure everything is perfect. And now I don't know how to just let go." Mark reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to be perfect, Eleanor. None of us are. I'm not perfect either, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Eleanor looked down at their hands, her grip tightening slightly. She had spent so many years hiding behind the walls she had built for herself. She had kept everyone at arm's length, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being hurt. But with Mark, things were different. He had become her safe place, a person who saw her for who she truly was, not for the empire she had built or the image she projected. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But what if it's not enough? What if we try and it all falls apart?" Mark squeezed her hand gently. "Then we rebuild. Together. I'm not afraid of that. I've already started rebuilding my life because of you." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. She had never felt this way before, not even when she had built her empire. There was something in Mark's eyes that made her feel like she was finally seen for the person she truly was. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I do. You're not alone in this, Eleanor. You never will be." And with those words, something inside Eleanor shifted. The fear that had held her captive for so long began to melt away. She no longer needed to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. She had Mark by her side, and together, they could face whatever came their way. They sat there in the garden, the quiet hum of the world around them. For the first time, they both felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were no longer facing them alone. Their marriage, which had started as a contract, was now something far more meaningful. It was a partnership, built on trust, understanding, and the willingness to be vulnerable. They had crossed a line from mere acquaintances to something real. And though there would still be hurdles to overcome, they both knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that was theirs to write together. As Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate their evolving relationship, they found themselves facing new challenges, ones that tested not only their bond but their individual strengths. Their connection had blossomed into something deeper, but life was never that simple. The past still loomed over them, and the outside world wasn't always as understanding as they wished. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work for Eleanor, she returned home exhausted. She barely spoke as she entered the house, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the decisions she had to make. Mark noticed immediately. He had come to recognize the signs, the small shifts in her mood that hinted at the pressure she was under. He found her in the study, sitting at the desk, her head buried in her hands. Without a word, he walked over, sitting down beside her. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice gentle. "Talk to me." She didn't look up at first. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, she sighed and met his gaze, her eyes tired and full of worry. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mark," she admitted, her voice strained. "There are so many expectations at work, from my family, from everyone around me. I can't keep up with it all. I thought marrying you would make things easier, but now I'm not even sure who I am anymore. Mark's heart ached as he listened to her. He had seen her strength, her determination, but now, for the first time, he saw the vulnerability beneath it all. You don't have to do this alone, he said, his voice firm. We're in this together. No matter what comes, we'll face it side by side. Eleanor's eyes searched his face, her expression conflicted. But what if I fail, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I can't handle everything, even with you by my side? Mark reached out, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. Failure isn't the end, Eleanor. It's just another step. And it doesn't define you. You've built something incredible, but you don't have to carry the weight of it all by yourself. We'll find a way through this together. For a long moment, Eleanor didn't say anything. She just looked at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Finally, she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice cracking. Scared that I've lost myself in all of this. I don't know how to be me anymore, not without all the pressure and expectations. Mark pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms around her providing the comfort and security she had been craving. You haven't lost yourself, he whispered. You're still here. And you don't have to be everything for everyone. You just need to be yourself for us. That's enough. Eleanor leaned into him, letting herself relax for the first time in days. The weight of the world didn't feel so heavy when he was holding her. In that moment, Mark realized how far they had come. Their marriage had started as a contract, but now, it was something deeper, something rooted in love, trust, and the willingness to grow together. They had built something real, something that was theirs. As the days passed, Eleanor allowed herself to lean on Mark more. She began to open up about the burdens she had carried for so long, and Mark became her rock, offering support and understanding without hesitation. They both knew that there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, they felt ready to face them together. One evening, as they stood in the garden, Mark turned to Eleanor, a smile playing on his lips. I think we're doing it, he said softly. We're actually building a life together, without all the walls. Eleanor smiled back, the weight in her heart lighter than it had been in months. Yeah, she agreed, her voice filled with quiet confidence. We are. And for the first time since they had entered this unexpected marriage, Eleanor felt a sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing she wasn't alone. The journey ahead would not be without its difficulties, but as long as they had each other, they would face it all with strength and love. They had built something real, and that was enough. As the months passed, Mark and Eleanor's life together grew stronger. The foundation they had built, starting from the ashes of a contract, was now becoming a true partnership. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of their past would creep into their thoughts. But each time, they learned to face it together. Eleanor's empire, once her only focus, no longer defined her. She had begun to redefine success in her own terms, not through the pressure of expectations, but through the love and support she had found in Mark. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Eleanor turned to Mark, her face soft and thoughtful. Mark, she began, her voice calm but filled with something deeper, I've been thinking a lot about everything, the way we started, the journey we've been on. I never expected any of this. I never thought that a marriage that started as a business arrangement could become something real. Mark looked at her, his heart full, his smile reflecting the quiet pride he felt. I never thought it either, he admitted. But somewhere along the way, it became clear to me that this was more than I could have ever imagined. He reached over, gently taking her hand in his. We've built something real, Eleanor. And that's all that matters now. Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes filling with warmth. I think I always knew, deep down, that I wasn't meant to do this alone. I was just too afraid to admit it. But now, I know we can face whatever comes next, together. The words hung in the air between them, filling the room with a sense of finality, of peace. It was a new beginning, one they had never expected, but one they had created with their own hands. They had crossed a line from strangers bound by a contract to a couple bound by love. And it felt right. Later that week, during a quiet dinner, Mark looked at Eleanor across the table, his heart racing with the weight of what he was about to say. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady, "I know we've been through a lot. And I know that we've already committed to each other in so many ways. But there's something I need to say." Eleanor met his gaze, her heart racing too, a soft smile forming on her lips. "What is it?" she asked. Mark took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I love you. I've loved you for a while now, but I needed to make sure I was ready for this. For everything. And now. I know I am." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, her heart swelling at his words. She had known it too, but hearing him say it, finally saying what had been left unspoken for so long, was everything. "I love you too, Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The weight of their journey was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something even greater. That night, under the soft glow of the moonlight, Mark and Eleanor stood together, facing the future with open hearts and hands intertwined. They had built a life from a contract, yes, but now it was a life of their own machina, life rooted in love, trust, and a commitment to face everything that came their way, together. As they stood there, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them. Their love was no longer just a story of survival or obligation, it was a story of transformation, of two people finding each other in the most unexpected way. And as the years went on, they would look back on this moment, knowing that it was the beginning of a journey that neither of them had expected, but one that had turned out to be more beautiful than either of them could have ever imagined.